Welcome, everyone, to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm your host, Christine Courtney. Our goal here is to give you some actionable takeaways that will help you lead your teams. Thanks for joining us on this leadership journey. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to the Leadership Studio. I'm very excited that today we have two people in the studio. So we're jam-packed in here with lots of knowledge and lots of fun today because we have a very fun, exciting topic for you. And back here is a veteran of this Leadership Studio, which is Greg Shamie. Greg Shamie's back. Hey, hello, Greg.
Hello, everybody.
I also have his partner in crime on this particular topic, and I'll explain that in a second. But the magical Meaghan Cross is here, and Meaghan is also a longtime employee at the leadership program, and she's a program manager for us. She does amazing work with so many of our clients, but also in her past, and I guess current, because she was an actor. And as well, has done a lot of improvisation. And that's the clue, because today's topic, we're going to be talking about improvisation in the workplace and why it can be so great a tool to help people build the skills necessary to creatively solve problems, to navigate issues. You're going to learn strategies today that will help you build trust, step out of your comfort zone, be a little more creative, a little more innovative, and also have a ton of fun in the process. So it also can be a little scary and sometimes cringeworthy. So that bit of daring also makes it exciting. So we're going to dive into it. If you're joining us for this topic, it is one that we get requests on to go out and help companies with, to do things. And the reason why is because you can learn skills, but it's also fun, right? People think of improv as comedy, but you don't have to be funny. As a matter of fact, when you try to be funny, that often messes it up. So don't worry. If you don't feel like you're funny, you can still do improvisation. And also we also have requests to go out to universities where we have companies that we work for that are recruiting out of universities and use it as a tool to help them in the recruitment process. So that can be cool too. So I know Greg and Meaghan go on the road a lot with their improv show and talking about how these really seemingly fun, creative, and entertainment worthy skills of improv can also be really kind of hard-hitting skills in terms of making your workplaces more productive and more effective places. So welcome, guys.
Hey, thanks. Excited to be here. How about you, Meaghan?
I'm very, very excited. A little bit nervous, but also that was a great introduction, Christine. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think that's exactly how a lot of people feel when we talk about improv. Excited, a big smile on their face, and a little bit nervous in their stomach, right? I know I feel that way.
Why do you think that's the case? Why? Why do people get nervous when they have to do improv? That's a great question.
I think it's anything, Greg, that you don't have a script for, anything that is you're doing it on the spot. And actually, I think that little bit of nerves kind of gives you an edge and gives you that impetus to be a little daring and creative and make mistakes even.
Yeah, the nerves are the juice. The nerves are the fuel,
Absolutely.
Right? So if I'm not nervous, then there's something wrong.
It also makes people in the room pay attention, right? When we think that people don't have a script or it's not going to go according to plan, everybody else is kind of more engaged and listening stronger as well. So why don't you guys, Greg, why don't I start with you in terms of why improvisation can be so powerful for companies. I gave like a little tidbit of that, but I know there has been a lot of research on this topic. It's not just that we feel that it works, right? There has been real studies done on this. But what have you seen from your perspective?
I mean, it's incredible when I think about all the different elements that I work on teaching to managers, to executives, to you name it. From trust building to giving effective feedback to navigating difficult conversations. When teams want to work on, or when executives want their teams to work on improvisation, I see the most growth happen to individuals. And I think that is because it's so much about stepping out of your comfort zone. And I think that I'm a big believer, when I step out of my comfort zone, I grow the most. So the intention to, again, break that fear barrier that's keeping me in my comfort zone and get into a growing zone, a learning zone, that's going to transform my trajectory. And so when we do improv, a lot of it is, obviously we're professionals, so we scaffold it, meaning we build it slowly. But a lot of it is getting people to really step out of their comfort zone, to do things they would never do in their normal job. And so by stretching those muscles, just like an athlete uses a donut on a bat before they go up to the plate, right? They put a heavy weight on the bat and they swing it. It's the same kind of thing. If you can swing it with the heavy weight on, you take the weight off, that bat is now light, and you can actually hit potentially a 93-mile-an-hour fastball because that bat is much lighter. So it's the same kind of thing. Improvisation, to me, is about stretching muscles beyond the comfort zone so that we can ultimately have the flexibility, versatility to be able to do anything after we've done that.
Wow. Okay. That's a pretty big statement that you said in terms of that you've seen people grow the most out of doing this. So that's very interesting to me. And I wrote that down because I want to ask a little bit later some examples. I'm going to ask Meaghan this same question, but some examples of tangible ways you've seen that, because I bet you others are wondering about that too, because that's a really strong, and I think you're probably right. I just want to know, I'm like dying to know a little bit more. But before we go there, I want to get Meaghan's voice here to just add on to anything that Greg said.
I'm going to yes and, which is my favorite improv rule, yes and, which is agreeing and then adding too. And I would say that for me, though, the biggest tangible thing that improv brings is being in the moment, right? Life is improv. We don't have a script for our lives. We don't have a script for our interactions with our family, our friends, our coworkers every day. And I think this goes back to different episodes, the one on mindfulness, the one on growth mindset, that idea of being in the moment and living in the moment and reacting to what is happening in that second. You're not planning, what I'm going to say 5 minutes from now. I'm not trying to think about, what happened in my last meeting or my last interaction. It is what's happening right now. I'm reacting in the moment to the person, to the situation. And that, quite frankly, that's like, you're in it, you're so focused, then you're going to have the best outcome, I think.
That's great. I love that because you're right. Life is an improvisation. We're not scripted. It's only at work that we've written out our lines or we've presented our PowerPoint. Most of the time, even at work, we're having to deal with things in the moment. Those are great.
Yeah.
Two great things.
Can I add a thought there? A yes and as well, because it is one of my favorite strategies, improv strategies. And it's that I feel like I have control, right? And this has to do with being in the moment, but I really never have control. It's a false paradigm. I never have control. And so being able to live in the mindset, in the mind frame of not having control and being present in that moment and being able to navigate it is going to help me no matter what the situation is.
Yeah. Great. So we've brought up yes and. So I feel like you need to describe it a little bit more for those of people out there that it's a brand new concept.
So when you're in an improv scene, if someone gives you a character or a scene, you as the scene partner, so Christine, if you were to say, "Hello, Grandma, how are you doing today?" to me, then I become the grandma and I would yes and that by saying, "Oh, Christine, welcome. Thank you so much for visiting me. You know, I'm 80 years old and I get no visitors ever, so I'm so glad to see you." That's yes and you're continuing on the scene. Negating that would be, "I'm not your grandmother, Christine. I'm your best friend from high school. Don't you remember?" And then that stops the scene. That stops the momentum, that stops any energy that your scene partner has. And then they have to now fumble and kind of figure out a new situation. But when you're yes anding, accepting the situation, accepting the characters, accepting what is happening, and then adding on to that, you're creating, first of all, a great scene to continue, be funny, have whatever fun. You're making your scene partner feel comfortable because you're like, "That's a great idea. I'm taking that idea and running with it." And I think the same thing is true for business. Someone comes to you with a great idea. Christine, if I came to you with a great idea for the company and you were like, "That's not going to work," how would I feel? Would I ever come to you again with ideas of fresh things to do? No. But even if you are like, "Oh, I have some reservations about this," you're going to listen and say, "Thank you so much. Let me talk it over with the executive team. Let me do this and that. I'll come back to you." That breeds creativity, that breeds trust, that breeds communication, teamwork.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
I was just going to say, it's an incredible idea, yes and, because if you think of brainstorming, you're going for quantity, right? Not quality initially, and then you synthesize down to quality. But first you got to get the quantity. And in order to get that, you have to build a culture of yes and in order to build on ideas and get ideation happening at the highest levels. And so yes and, exactly what Meaghan was saying for me, it's the affirmation of ideas. It's the building on of ideas. It's creating a culture of openness, of creativity. And ultimately, it's a problematizing method. right? Because you're getting people working together and throwing things on top of each other until you figure out what the best solution is. So it's a solution-based strategy.
Yeah. Great. And there's wonderful ways when Greg and Meaghan come into the workplace that they do, they use really fun, low stakes things, right? That make this really easy to do, and isn't so heady or difficult, right? You're doing it before you even realize that you're doing it. But what I love about that is that the opposite of yes and is no but, right? And how often in work, in life, do we have no buts going on in our head all the time? And the wonderful thing of when we brought this yes and culture to our workplace, it really started to shift things in terms of the way that people brought themselves to a brainstorm, the way people brought themselves to a meeting, the way people brought themselves to like learning something new, especially if you've been somewhere a long time. So I love that. And it can also be really fun. So if they're using something funny, like if Meaghan pulls up a spatula and says, this is my new telephone, and Greg goes, how does that telephone work, Meaghan? It's different than, no, Meaghan, that's a spatula. Well, end of scene, but also end of possibility of what can happen. It's really easy to watch people go afterwards, how does that relate to work? And how can we be better about how something is created and how are we innovating here, right?
One of my favorite parts about the yes and strategy also is that you're assuming brilliance on the part of your colleague or colleagues, right? And so that is a mindset change already. To just assume brilliance on your collaborator is already going to take your potential to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you want to, we did cover some of this in episode 25 with Erica, which is on the dreamer, critic, and realist, because Walt Disney used this a lot in his work, whether they called it improvisation or not. He used it in this idea of role playing. And if you do any role playing at all, whether you're on a sales team, whether you're role playing a difficult conversation, whether you're talking through with your husband before you have to, have a hard conversation with someone at work, any of that is an improv. It's all a role play, right? To figure out what can happen. Okay, great. That's a great first example of one of probably the core idea of improvisation, which is yes and. You can also use it in your life. If you're out there and you don't have a business or a team, you can still use this in your life. You can use it with your kids, anything. So, Greg, what's another thing that you guys use besides that idea of yes and that really helps foster some positive ideas or change in the workplace?
Well, we talked about this concept of stepping out of your comfort zone. So that's definitely one of the key things that frames the whole experience. Another one is this idea of judgment and how impeding our judgments are of ourselves. So we find a ton working one-on-one, working one-on-many, that my worst enemy is myself. And you see how self-deprecating people are and how hard people are on themselves, right? In a lot of ways. And so this idea of reducing the judge creates an ability to fail. And when we create the safe space to take a risk and potentially fail for short term, long term, we're going to get way better, right? So it's this short term unsuccessfulness that's going to lead to long-term success. And so creating an environment where we eliminate the judge so that we can really start to expand, experiment, and grow ourselves is something that is at the heart, I think, of really great improvisational strategy sessions.
Yeah. And if you're out there thinking, I can't ever eliminate this judge, it's so strong in my head, that's okay. Just let him rest a little bit for a while and say, you'll be back soon, but let's just pause it. And you don't have to wait till the judge is gone to jump in. Because sometimes if you're really in the moment, like Meaghan says, you'd be surprised how it goes away anyway. You don't have to get to a point. It's like meditation, right? People say, oh, I can't meditate because I'm always thinking about other things. Well, you're meditating in spite of that. And you're also, I think, doing improv, Greg, in spite of the judge that sometimes is there. I'll
make a sports analogy, and then Meaghan, maybe compare it to theater and stage.
Good, because I'm not making a sports analogy.
Exactly.
She's already like, how do you put a donut on a baseball bat?
I would eat the donut. I'm so confused.
That's hilarious. So the sports analogy is, like for those who have been in a high intense moment in a sports competition and you're totally in the zone, right? When it's over, you kind of don't really remember what happened in that moment because you were so in the zone. There was no judge. If you're the pitcher, it was me and the catcher's glove, right? It was me and the glove. I was one with the glove. And but then I look back and I'm like, what happened in that moment? I was so in the zone. And so that is, to me, the reduction of the judge, right? If I increase my being in the moment and in the zone, then the judge isn't going to be present. So, okay, Meaghan, you're on.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And I think the judge is really hard for me even because, especially as like a woman and being younger in our organization, I feel like, oh, well, my opinion or what my idea isn't, they've been there, done that. They've been doing this forever. What am I contributing? That's not gonna, I don't have the experience that other folks have. And I think that's a lot of times, especially with certain groups of people, like they really don't think I belong in this room. So I'm going to wait until it's my turn, or I'm going to wait. When you do improv, you're in like a line. If there's a scene happening, you kind of step in, step out. So if you step in, if you're going to join the scene, and if someone steps in and you step in, you kind of navigate that. And then you kind of figure out, oh, who's going to be, oh, you know what? Actually, I've been doing a lot of scenes. I'm going to let this person go, let this person lead, which leads me to another thing that I really love about improv is that teamwork, and that the teamwork and the partnership that you have with your group or your scene partner. And if someone's floundering and they're not, the scene's kind of taking a dive, that's where it's up to your scene partner and your team to help you and either lift you up by adding some new ideas, or they can call it what's wipe the scene. They go in front, they walk in front of the actors, and then that scene is over, and then you can start anew. So you can start fresh. So everyone's like always holding each other, has your back. And I think that's also a really great metaphor for the workplace, because if you see someone floundering in a meeting, there's been times where I've had really high stress meetings and I've been with a colleague and I'm like, struggling for words, and I've had someone be like, what I think Meaghan is trying to say here, or what Meaghan is saying here, or whatever, how they ever phrase it in a really kind, compassionate way. And then they take over and I'm like, oh, thank God. Because I was like in a place where I was treading water. I'm not sure where I'm going here. And we don't want to see our colleagues fail, at least not in our organization. We're building each other up constantly because that makes the whole team better, the whole organization better.
Oh, I love that example because I've seen you guys do an improv exercise, correct me if I'm wrong here, but where people have to jump in, just like you said, and start talking about something like they're an expert or whatever until somebody else jumps in and adds on to them, right? And keeps it going. And so it can be hard when you're that person. You have an initial idea, you jump in, and then you're like, I'm kind of, as you're talking, thinking in your head, I'm kind of running out of ideas. And if Greg and Meaghan, whoever's behind me doesn't jump in and save me, I could really be floundering out here. And I think that's so great because I think there are so many real times in business where we do need to help each other in that, whether it's a meeting, whether that's with a client, whether that's a negotiation with a vendor. Like, how do we know that game? And if we're not practicing it, if we're not seeing ways that improv can help us get better in our work lives, then we're not realizing how much our work lives is an improvisation, and that we can learn to be better partners. And sometimes it's a little easier to learn that in a fun, silly way where it doesn't feel so shameful or so difficult,
Just think of the initial anxiety one may feel before stepping into a high intense moment, whether it's with a client or, they're presenting or what have you, whatever it is. Yeah. Think about the anxiety we feel, right, before stepping into that. What I've heard a lot of people say after taking the improv class is they feel much more confident in being able to step into those high intense moments because you're stepping in not knowing exactly how it's going to go. You're stepping in with the goal to connect with your audience and to share important content around that, right? And so the anxiety level goes down because, again, we're stretching the muscles in ways that are expanding our abilities to step into these high intense moments.
Yeah, I love it. I think about, Greg, even when you and I have had some experiences where we've had to go into some pretty big clients and maybe it's our first time and it's not how we expected it to be. Like there's triple the amount of people. This space isn't conducive. You can't hear anybody. We're not mic'd. We're looking at each other like, oh my God, we are going to drown, and you'll look at me and go, That's okay. We got this. We know what to do. I got your back. You start here. I'll come in here, and then I go, oh, okay. And then you won't leave me hanging. I'll come in and then you'll come in. You'll kind of, get some laughs, get them focused over here. I can breathe and I'm like, oh, okay. And while you're going, I'm working the crowd over here to be sure they're listening to you or, moving around the room. Think about how that compares to situations I know I was in my early career where you go in as a team to present something. And you have your part of the presentation and the other person has their part of the presentation. And while they're going, I could have been filing my nails or, writing my own notes in preparation for when I speak. Instead of being really present in the moment, being there to support Greg, being there to support whatever happens in the room and trusting that if I do that, then I'm going to have the words. I'm going to have the way to come into this moment and that Greg is going to do the same thing for me. And that is so much more exciting and so much more relaxing than the opposite. Like that's real teamwork. And I think that's really easy to see when you guys do these improvisation trainings, as opposed to just talking about presenting our PowerPoint and you take slides, even slides, and I'll take odd slides. And I'm checked out when it's not my turn or I'm just thinking about my part.
That's why it's not about the content, really. It's about the connection, right? So a lot of times in our, presenting with impact workshops, we're really working on audience connection, building connectivity with the audience. The content, of course, is important. But if I'm just going to go and recite my content the way I practiced it, boring. Right? I need to have like that living on the edge of the cliff feeling, which is improv in a nutshell. You're on the edge of the cliff and everyone's watching. And I'm not going for a big funny result because that's not going to work. I'm actually just waiting to see what Meaghan is going to offer me. And then I'm going to yes and it. And I'm going to do what Christine was just saying, support and build. And that's how you build team dynamic.
Yeah, I love it. We've got those ideas of being in the moment, of kind of thinking on your feet, right? Which who doesn't have to think on their feet? Who doesn't need their employees to think better on their feet? And I think improv is a great training ground for thinking on their feet. I mean, in our business, we do a lot of work in schools. And we hire a lot of people, a lot of actors, a lot of musicians, a lot of dancers, a lot of people who are really good at thinking on their feet, train them in leadership skills, and then put them out into these environments where they're going to have to do exactly that. Think on their feet and then have some of these skills to back them up. So what else besides the teamwork partnership, the yes ands, the kind of getting out of your comfort zone? What are some other things that you've seen improv help with? Meaghan, you have any?
Christine, I think you said it. You said listening, really listening, which is part of being in the moment of you're listening to the situation, you're listening to the people in the room. And it's not just listening to what they're saying. It's also, and we talk about this all the time with the, emotional intelligence. It's listening to their body language. It's listening to how other people are reacting to what's being said or done in the room. And then pivoting accordingly, right? If people are really uncomfortable with what's happening and they're not saying anything, but they're shifting in their seats or they're doing things that indicate that, like listen to that and make a shift. Don't keep plowing through with what you're doing if it's not working. And that's really key in improv. And I think in business and in those interactions, human interactions in general.
Yeah, it's such a good point because some of the best improvisers are really observers, right? They're really good listeners. And you notice that. And you also notice who's just wants to talk and get their ideas out and isn't listening to others. The scenes go flat, things go dead. It's just, it's not nearly as interesting or full of depth. And so those listening skills, if you have an organization where you're like, we need to listen more, improvisation may be a great tool to helping listen in all areas of one's life,
Even if you're trying to build your presence as a leader in an organization. I have a client right now who's, pretty high up, but is working on continuing to grow their skills. And one of their things is how can I stay present? How can I stay in the moment? And how can I really listen to understand others when so much is going on? I have so many things happening as a leader in the firm, and it's very difficult to stop my brain from going to the past or the future. And so I have a difficult time being present. And I know that I need to be present if I'm going to be an effective leader, right? So we have all kinds of improv activities we do that help us be in the moment and start to build that skill, which is really a fascinating skill, especially in today's age with technology and everything and our attention spans diminishing at warp speed. It's unbelievable. And so working on our attention spans, like you said, pay attention is going to transform my leadership.
And Greg is right. We do this really fun. It's one of my favorite activities, improv exercises, where you're an interpreter for an alien and the alien speaks in gibberish. And so there's 3 people in the scene. There's the alien speaking gibberish, the interpreter who can understand and speak gibberish, but also speaks English. And then there's a dignitary or some representative from Earth, and they're having a meeting, and whatever the meeting is about, but you're interpreting for the alien and for the earthling. And that's where the listening is really key, because the alien is saying gibberish, and Greg loves to play the alien for obvious reasons.
I love gibberish.
He loves being silly. And it's, you're interpreting, because then you're creating it, whatever it is. If you're the interpreter, I love to be the interpreter. And, you're really looking at the body language and the gesticulations and the facial expressions to come up with what they're saying. And sometimes we go into meetings, we work with clients, and they say a thing and you're like, I have no idea what that is. But I think then you reinterpret that. I have that a lot where I work with schools and they're really wanting something. And I'm like, actually, I'm hearing this, or I'm getting this. So interpreting, that's a really big thing. And it is connected to listening and really listening to all the aspects of an interaction.
Yeah, social cues, right? I love it. That's great.
The other thing, Christine, that I think improv really gets across to participants who take this course it's this idea of being able to creatively problem solve. So this is the most needed skill in the workplace.
Yeah.
Problem solving. People want problem solvers. They want solution-based problem solvers, right? And that is the skill that everyone is looking for. And so we are developing it. We are developing it through improv. And that is super exciting, because if you can navigate all these different challenges that Meaghan and I give you, then you're developing the skill to be able to problem solve for any equation.
Yeah, I love it. Creative problem solving, huge. I agree. I also think it's an enormous sales tool. And if you can use improvisation with your sales team, you are going to see such increased results in them being able to think on their feet, because you can just put people in the role of client, the role of salesperson, the role of, a third party, whatever you want, and create kind of fun ways to work with your sales team that it's not so stressful for them to do a role play. I talked to some sales teams and they're like, we can't do role plays with our people. It puts them on the spot too much, stresses them out. It's a really negative environment because they do this role play and then everybody kind of just gives them tons of feedback, and they're really missing an opportunity. One, I want to say no, you can do role plays, and you kind of must, especially with your sales team, but you can do it in a way that doesn't feel so stressful to them. What are ways that you can do it in a more fun way?
I mean, if role plays are done poorly, it's the worst experience ever. And 98% of the time, they're done really badly. They're awful. And so people are like, don't do role plays. I don't want to do role plays, because they've had terrible experiences doing role plays. If it's done well, right, and we are from a performance-based background, we know how to do this. You create a safe environment, you build slowly, you give clear directives, you have them explore. It can be the most beneficial way to practice real-life situations prior to having the real-life situations.
Right.
Yeah.
When someone goes to their first music lesson as a kid, you're not starting them with Mozart's, concerto or something. You know what I mean? You're going to start with something that they can relate to, that's fun, that makes touching the keys or whatever you're doing fun and not so full of judgment and stress, right? And I think you guys are great at doing that. The other thing that, is really important when you talk to people from great improv houses like Second City in Chicago, or I have a friend who worked with the Groundlings in LA or whatever, those people who did that work for a long time, their minds are so sharp, right? They can think of anything in any environment, whether it's personal, whether it's business, whether it's with their kids. They're constantly coming up with like quick, fast things because their mind is used to firing on all cylinders from that training. And if you think that just one time of trying a couple of improv exercises is enough, it's not. It's a skill. Improvisation is a skill. Thinking on your feet is a skill. And if you want people to be better at listening, better at thinking on their feet, better at presenting, better at teamwork, these are kinds of things that you need to be brushing up on all the time, creating a culture of all the time. We have a lot of people who were in the arts who did this, myself included growing up, and we still need to brush up on it. We find that we get better at it when we practice it, even. So I really encourage people to remember that this is something that is a skill that needs to be trained and worked on pretty regularly.
There's a lot of data that says that we learn when we laugh. So, if you're having a good time, then the learning has stronger possibility to stick. If you're just listening to a talking head, it's like, oh, that was interesting. Bye-bye. It's gone.
Yeah.
Good point. But Christine also makes a good point with practicing in a low stakes environment with either your team or your direct reports. Because if you can't do it in a space that's the most loving and supportive, how are you going to do these skills when you're in a high pressure situation with a high stakes client, or, in a networking situation where someone comes up to you and just asks you a question and you're like, and those are high pressure situations. If you can't do it in the loving environment, how can you do it? So you need to practice. Like, that's the best way to get better.
Yeah, so true. And, I'm thinking of this too, because my kids are older now, and they're interviewing for colleges or for jobs or things like that. It's also giving them opportunities to practice some of those questions. Like, okay, they're going to ask you this question. Like, what are some ways to do it in a way that doesn't feel so stressful for them, so that when it happens, just like auditioning, right? The more you audition, the better you get at auditioning. The more you are thinking on your feet, the better you get at thinking on your feet. And that's what we want out there, right?
Another benefit, you just highlighted it, is a lot of clients I've worked with feel that after doing improv exercises, they can then do the Q&A at the end of their presentation way more effectively.
Yes!
Because they feel great about their presentation because they've practiced it, they know what they're doing. But then when it's free form and the audience is asking questions, they freeze up, they get high anxiety. And so this, again, is a no-brainer in terms of helping one step out of their comfort zone and really be able to navigate anything that's coming their way, any question or what have you.
That's great. What are some tips? Any other tip? You've given a lot of good ones so far. Like, I loved the one you just said, Meaghan, about a low stakes environment is a good place to start. I think certainly, and we brought it up, is that bringing in some people like yourselves to work, to show some examples of ways that this can be fun, is not only skill building, it's team building at the same time. But what other things can people do to kind of build or foster improvisation in the workplace?
It's a mindset from top down. And if higher ups, executives are willing to jump in and do this kind of work, or embrace the mistakes, or embrace, failing without judgment, embracing those creative brainstormings where you're yes-anding, then other folks are going to be excited to give those ideas. Because if you're feeling the judgment from top down, you're definitely going to have that inner judgment for sure.
Oh, I love that you said that, because, I did some of these workshops a few years back, and I'll always go up to the person who hired us, or the person that people are most afraid of in the room, that would be most thinking, like, whether it's the head of HR or whether it's the CEO or whether it's their boss, and saying, listen, are you good with me putting you on the spot and you jumping in early to lead a good example? And most of the time they're like, do I have to? And I'm like, it's going to be great. I'm going to be so careful with you. You're going to shine, but it's really important for your people to see you jump in first in order for them to feel, like you said, Meaghan, that they can make a mistake or that it's okay. And then once that boss does it, oh my gosh, they're so much more willing to do it. But
yeah. It's like, as a parent, if my kid is scared to go somewhere new, I'm like, if I do the thing first, whatever it is, the game or the go on the ride or jump into the ball pit, then they're like, oh, it's safe for mommy. It's safe for me. So
I picture you jumping into every ball pit.
Yes, I only do it because my child is scared, not because it's awesome fun.
No, but to all leaders in all organizations, role modeling is our most undervalued ability, right? And to transform culture, to transform any kind of behavior. It all comes from role modeling, which puts a lot of pressure on you. So step up and start role modeling, which is really exciting. But the other thing I was going to say is in real life business, we don't like to hear the word fail. Right. So like talking about, let's eliminate the judge and let's fail. No, it actually in business, we can't fail, but we need to create spaces where we can experiment and prototype and mess around with so that we can then step into the real river and fly and swim and whatever, do really well. So we have to be creating those safe places to practice and
experiment.
Really experiment. Yeah.
Agreed.
I love it. Well, maybe that's a great way to end on both of you ending at the exact same moment. But I want to just thank both you guys for not only being here today, but doing this work with our company. Like jumping into a room full of people who have performance as a background can also be intimidating, right? And you guys always do it, whether it's at our big all hands staff meetings, you create moments where we can laugh at ourselves, where we can work on thinking on our feet in a non-judgmental way, and how much joy and laughter and also learning that brings to all of us. So I want to thank you for that, and also for bringing it out there to other folks as well. There's a lot you can learn from the team of Shamie and Cross. For those of you out there that want to see more of Greg and Meaghan, there are some videos of free webinars that we have available that will be in the notes for this episode. If you want to download that, there's also some PDFs of examples that you can see. If you want to check the notes of this, you can also always go to our website to find out more information too, which is tlpnyc.com. So thank you guys for being here, and hopefully we'll have you back again. Thank you guys.
Hey, thanks, Christine. Thanks, Meaghan. Always a pleasure.
Greg, of course. Our dynamic duo.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'd like to give a special shout out to our podcast producer, Richard Francisco. Check out our notes for any details. And if you get anything out of this, please follow us. And if you enjoy it, please take a moment to rate us or write a comment. It will mean the world to us. We'd love to hear from you. And if you just can't get enough, follow me on TikTok and check out tlpnyc.com/podcast for more information.